We have Anthony Allan Ramos joining us from GLAAD. Woo! Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh my gosh, happy Pride.
Happy
Pride.
Pride every day, but happy Pride extra this month.
Exactly.
Right.
And Meghan had me and Jordan on the podcast to talk about our coming out journeys and whatnot, but
And
I
how
wanted
different they were.
and how different they were. But I wanted someone to be able to come on and speak from a more professional perspective on what you do at GLAAD, what are the important issues that we're facing at the moment. But maybe if you just want to start by introducing yourself and what you do at GLAAD and what GLAAD does on a larger scale. Would love to hear about
Yeah,
that.
listen, I will do all that. But, you know, speaking about coming out journeys, the one thing that GLAAD and I always say is there's no rules. Everyone has their own journey. Out is different for everyone. You do it when you feel safe. You do it when you're ready. So, you know what? We love it. So congrats to you both. Cheers to you both. But yes, anyway, I'm Anthony Allan Ramos. I'm with GLAAD, the world's largest LGBTQ advocacy organization. And so really what that means is that we work with and through media to make sure that there are accurate, inclusive, well-done storylines, representations of LGBTQ people in media, because we know that it's wonderful for us in the community to see ourselves represented on screen, in music, video games, now everything. But it's also media is so important in shaping the narrative of what others, their levels of acceptance and what they see. And so, you know, listen, like you can't underestimate the power of media when it comes to film, TV, music, and beyond. And so we are working every day to make sure that we're included the right way, and that we're included in ways that will really, you know, change culture.
We were just talking about how when we were all younger, because we're kind of the same age, we're like near our 30s. When we were all younger, that like you could count on one hand the amount of gay representation we remember on our screens.
Right.
So it's awesome that y'all do that.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And I think that with, you know, we're getting to a place, it's a crazy time, as we know, which I know we're going to talk about. But I think, you know, when you have someone who sees themselves, whether they're a younger person or they, you know, it gives so much more opportunity for them to feel accepted and to accept themselves and to live a really full and great life. And so, you know what, it's like, it sounds silly at times, but like so much of what people see on film and TV is super important. And so we're, you know, really making sure that it's done well and that queer people are included.
Period.
Amen. We were talking about that earlier. It's such an interesting experience when you're younger of like being gay and not being out yet, and like watching a TV show with your parents and you see Kurt from Glee on the TV and you're like, I feel represented, but I also am like, you're in the closet phase. You're like, oh shit, my parents are here. This is so awkward. Do they know I'm gay? And you have that moment. But ultimately it's like to see a gay, like I think my first was probably like Desperate Housewives, the gay couple that lived next door. For me was a moment I remember from my childhood of like, oh, this is the first time I'm like seeing this representation on TV. And I think that not that all these hetero relationships like implicitly make you feel worse about yourself, but you're just not, that's the norm. And then to have that introduced is like, I don't know, it's so relieving and eye-opening for a young gay person. And there's a lot more of it these days as well, which is awesome to see. But we were also just talking about how like, maybe we're trying to dissect exactly what's sort of happening, and so interested in your take on it. Like maybe when we were younger too, maybe we were shielded from some of the like negative hate as well, and now that's become more accessible.
Maybe it was always there and we just didn't see it as much because now we have TikTok and Instagram and all this social media, and we're like, are we just like hearing it more now? And it's getting, because it feels like it's getting worse, and it's like scarier for people to go to a store or to go to a restaurant when it should be backwards. We're like 2023, it should be getting way better. So do you think it's because we're seeing it more, and then it's always been there, or it's truly getting worse?
Or is it a reflection people are just more comfortable being out now, and now more people are expressing themselves in ways that are more public, and the world is not necessarily
receptive of it?
It's just they're not ready for that.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think it's a combination of so many of the things that you just said. I think, you know, what is important to remember is like when I think about the movement, you know, like GLAAD has been around since 1985. It was originated to really combat the negative and inaccurate storylines that were coming out of New York City when it came to the HIV and AIDS crisis. And so I think about where we are, and I think the biggest thing with the way there is so much disparity with what's happening with so many states is, I think for the most part, not the most part, but not, I mean, the most part, but not everyone. Like most people are like, you know what? Gay men, cool. You know, I watch Will and Grace, they're fine. You know, I like Ellen, lesbians, cool. Like,
Yeah.
you know, that's kind of the mentality.
Family.
Right. And so where we're at is, unfortunately, for our trans brothers and sisters and our non-binary family members, it's really tough for them because that's where we are in this movement. We're really, I know GLAAD and so many other organizations, we're really putting the emphasis on changing the narrative, getting people to understand who trans people are, getting people to understand they're just like the rest of us, and really getting people to understand what that means. And so, you know, the more that we can have trans people on morning TV, you know, talking about themselves. You know, I think about Elliot Page right now, you know, with the book that he just wrote, and so many others, and Laverne Cox, obviously, and not just the two of them. Those are just obviously two of the most famous people. But it's like it's so important that that people get to know a trans person. You know, I think about so many things. You know, my aunt, for example, is not someone who's in the business at all, but you know, because of the work that I do, she's been, you know, a little bit more focused on these issues. And so I think about, you know, her telling me about going to the supermarket and meeting someone who was trans, and they had an amazing conversation. Like that's so important to have those touch points. And so I think the key to really getting us through this point of contention is to really just be as supportive and show these stories about trans people and non-binary people, because clearly that's where this is kind of, you know, it's getting to be a problem for people. And you know, GLAAD, I know we're doing everything we can to really change that narrative.
No, I think that's such a good point. I think people got comfortable with like, oh, the gay men side character on TV, but like now they're becoming more main characters, and now we're introducing other members of the LGBTQ plus community like to be more at the forefront. And they're like, okay, we were okay with like the gay guys living next door, but now like the trans representation is overwhelming for them, or it's too much. And I think it's also like they could maybe like they got to the point of, you know, more conservative people got to the point of like understanding and accepting like, oh, maybe my neighbor's gay, but like it has to sort of be black and white for them. Now you get into this area of like gender expression and gender identity, and how there can be more than two options for it, or how someone can change it. And that's like overwhelming and scary for them. And that's
they turn it, they think it's like some sort of agenda, but it's literally just like people want to be who they want to be. And as long as they're not hurting anybody, like what's the problem?
Yeah. Why are we freaking out?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's clearly, you know, so much of it is rooted in this toxic masculinity idea, because if you think about where we are with drag for years, like there's been, you know, drag has existed for a long time. It's obviously way before RuPaul's Drag Race, but props to RuPaul's Drag Race for taking it into this level. But I think, you know, it became this weird, unfortunate misinformation situation where drag and trans issues were being equated, and people started weaponizing each other. And I think it just goes back to that idea of like so many people in this country being threatened by something that potentially isn't like the masculine thing that they were told what was masculine. And when something becomes, you know, feminine, what does that mean? And it's like, you know, there's so much misinformation. I remember a couple of years ago, GLAAD had done a study about just people's levels of comfortability, levels of acceptance. And one of the questions was, who is a trans person that you know? And they said RuPaul. Obviously, RuPaul is not a trans person. RuPaul is a performer who, so it's just that, you know, there's so much misinformation. And so obviously we're really doing everything we can to use our voice in media to, you know, get people to wake up and really understand these important things.
Yeah, we got to teach them.
I think it's important too, what you said about like not shying away, and not like, it's important to put trans people at the forefront, and it's important for all of us to support them more than ever, and not I don't know too many like anyone personally that has done this, but like I think there are members of the gay community that might like see that as like, oh, like they're going too far and we're losing support, like let's shy away from that. It's like, no, we need to like put even more support behind them and continue to like put them at the forefront of this, so that people just like, it's not like when something like that happens and people become uncomfortable then you retreat. It's like, no, that's the point, to keep going harder. And it's interesting too with like allyship these days and pride. I remember a couple of years ago I would like laugh with friends of like, oh, look at all the companies are like changing their logos to the pride flag, and like here it's that time again. But now it's interesting this year, it's like, oh, there's companies that are not doing it, or there's companies that are doing it and then changing it quickly.
What's up with that?
Yeah. And it's like, this is
2023 that they're like,
this is when it's important, like not when it's like you can make fun merch, but
important. Now
show
they're
up.
just scared. Why do you think that's happening? Why is that changing now?
You know, I think it's one of those things. It's become like we're in this time where everything, when it comes to various pieces of acceptance for our community, it's so put onto this platform. You know, like you said, is it TikTok? Is it social media? And I think that like what's important to realize is that this isn't a time to stand down. It's not a time to be quiet. And I think that like with the work that we at GLAAD do, we do have a lot of corporate partners who we make sure that are, you know what, they're not just showing up in June. They are making sure to support us all year round. And so, look, obviously there's a lot of high profile ones that have been in the headlines about, you know, kind of not being as prideful when it comes to what they're doing in the month of June. But I also want to take a moment to realize there's a lot of really great companies that are, and I think it's important that they're to recognize that a lot of them are doubling down to say, you know what, we are here for June, but we're also here for every the other 11 months. And so I think it's so important because I know with some of the partners that we have at GLAAD, we've done a lot of work to really find ways to spotlight very important sections of the community. Like I remember we did all a collaboration where it was all about spotlighting Black queer voices and the art that they did. And so when a brand does that and really wants to be intentional with an organization like GLAAD, I mean, it's incredible. And so listen, like there is some weird stuff happening with some of these big ones, but I think there's also other ones that are really stepping up and doing really intentional good stuff. And so that's what I'm hoping will, you know, continue on.
So we'll highlight those ones.
Amen.
We'll find them.
And that's a true ally. That's like when the going gets tough and they're speaking out even more.
That's when you do it.
That's when you do it. That's the
Absolutely.
important time. What do you like for people listening who are like, how do I make a difference, or where are the resources, or where can I donate, or what are the important things I can do to make sure I feel like I'm making a difference or supporting members of the community? Like, is there any places that you point to or actions to take or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I always say, you know, Pride is a good time to reflect. And I think that, you know, the most basic thing is to, you know, if you're not a part of the community, you can be an ally. And I think it's important to remember that if you have someone who is LGBTQ and comes to you and is opening up to you about whether it's their journey, whether they're coming out, or whether there's a new piece of them, I think the most important thing is to remember is that it's their story to tell. And so if they're coming to you in confidence, it's not for you to then go tell your coworker or your mom or someone else. Like, you know, that's their story, and they may just be feeling comfortable like talking to you. And I know, like, and you all, and some of you know, like how it can feel to like, you know, finally want to like talk about that. So I always say, be a good friend, be a good listener is the most important thing when it comes to those things. If you have, you know, LGBTQ friends that are kind of, you know, opening up to you. I also think that, you know, you can obviously go to GLAAD.org. That's GLAAD.org. We are always making sure that our members, our followers are updated. You know, we're not a political organization. We are, you know, an advocacy organization. And so, listen, we'll make sure that everyone knows what's going on with legislation when it comes to our rights. But, you know, we're never going to be the one to say to, you know, vote for this person or not. And I think it's important that we just don't back down and really just keep. It's like the theme of the GLAAD Media Awards, which Meghan, I know you've been to. Thank you so much.
I love it.
Yeah, you were on your feet dancing for Lizzo. I'll never forget that. That was
it was the best day of my life.
I know, me too. But listen, like, it's important that we, you know, let's get loud. Let's just. It's so easy, and I feel it in the being a part of this. This organization and this movement, it can feel overwhelming, but it's like, this isn't the time to like back down and feel defeated. You got to just like find a way to pick yourself up. And I think that I really have hope, because it's like, I think about like the LGBTQ youth who they're so now like assured of who they are. And then I see their friends and no one cares for the most part. And so look, I feel like there's hope. I think that, you know, coming out as important as it is, and I think, you know, especially when you see someone of note, whether they're famous or an athlete or something, it has so much power to inspire others. Listen, at some point, it would be wonderful we could all just be and no one came out and we all just like, you know, so I think, you know, And you know, the one thing I also want to say about Pride is like it's also a really good opportunity for people in the community to open up, like find out about queer history, learn about what happened for you. You know, since starting at GLAAD 6 years ago, I have learned so much about who came before me. And I think there's so many of us that have privilege when it comes to, you know, whether we live in New York or LA, where it tends to be a little more, you know, acceptable and okay and less dangerous. It's like learn about what these people did to get to where we are, and then also use that to inspire yourself to take us to where we need to go, because clearly it's a really critical time.